We're coming in hot. So in the last couple of weeks, we've been in some different rooms. That's like the proverbial room. Like, what they say is if you're the smartest person in the room, or maybe in this context of today, like the fittest person in the room or the strongest person in the room or whatever, you need to find a different room.
Yep. You're in the wrong room.
Yeah, you're in the wrong room, man.
You're in the wrong room.
Find a different room. So we found a few different rooms over the last couple of weeks. It's been awesome. A couple of visits with some insanely talented people, but also some very driven people. And it led me, kind of down this thought process. And I was talking with CeCe just a little bit about it offline, because it is very different, but similar in a lot of ways to what we deal with or what a lot of people think about when they walk into their local gym, whatever happens, wherever they're training. And that there's a lot of different things that can mean for people. But I think just sort of in mainstream, a lot of people that listen to the show, they're going to their local gym, whatever it happens to be. Whether it's a CrossFit type style box or a personal training studio or even, whatever, one of the bigger box type places. Yeah, box places. And, they're looking around and there's a compare and contrast and it's vast. Like what you're comparing and contrast. You're like, who's the strongest guy in here? Well, fuck, it could be any guy on any day, depending on where you're going or, who's the fittest person? Who looks the best? Who's, the most neurotic about their workout program? Who does the most cardio? Like there's all these different things. When you walk into like the CrossFit things, it's inevitably a competition. And so,
how fast can you finish your WOD?
Yeah, or whatever. It's even up there on the wall. So you're comparing and contrasting that way. And I guess the point of that is when we walked into this room, looking around going, okay, here, the last room was kind of like, whoa, okay, there's some fit people, some people that are really working hard, kind of all the time first, I think it's in their personality. Mm-hmm. Second, I think it's, obviously it's their performance is being measured, like literally measured. And there's a pass fail. It's not, I feel good today, or, hey, you look good, high five, or your name got up on the board. It's literally like you either did this or you didn't. So you can either stay in the program or you're not in the program anymore. And for some people, maybe that's like an athlete that's on a team. Well, if you don't pass this, basic standard, then you can't play, or you're going to be, you can play, but you're
liability.
Yeah, you're on the third string, right?
Yeah.
Versus on the first string. And nobody wants to be on the third string for very long. I think that's another conversation, but being on the third string, I think, is a good thing for a while if you're not ready for the first string, right? But this whole concept came up of overtraining. And there's another little thing that parallels this, and we'll talk about it, called under recovery. And so the overtraining piece came up when you're working with high level people that are they're pushing. And again, this was the room we were in. They are pushing constantly. And sometimes other areas of their area or their life or their job or their sport or whatever is being pushed outside of their control or their plan. And what are the things that can kind of come up along that way? And oftentimes overtraining is a concern. However, it comes up kind of at the worst time every time. And overtraining is never a good thing. And aside from teaching you a lesson, it usually happens at the absolute worst time, right? When you're trying to peak, or when you're in a brand new phase and a critical part of that phase in terms of conditioning or strength building or power building or whatever else. So
and that new modality just takes you out.
Something happens. Yeah, something happens, or something comes up. And what I mean by that is like something is like, and it could be something as obvious as an injury, right? Which could be very much related to overtraining. Another thing, you could get sick, right? Things can take you out of your game, but they're not always as obvious as that. And even with those signs, like, people never ceases to amaze me. We just talked about this, like on the nutrition side, how hard people will work to ignore the signals that their body is sending them, like right away, going, hey, dude.
Yeah.
Might want to throttle back a little bit here. There's like this override that happens in the system again for high performers. Like, no, fuck that. We're going. And I've certainly been guilty of that.
Me too.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. I'm going to start with you, CeCe, like in terms of like the overtraining concept. Where is this? Do you remember when that came up for you last and what it was like?
So yes, I do remember. And I would say this is probably back in like the early 2000s. And it was for my first Ironman. And, I had done a half, but, going into the full, I had a good base under me, but then going into a different phase, the volume and the volume increased. And, I'd never done anything like this before. And so I remember feeling really tired. I would wake up in the morning. The first thought would be, when do I get to go back to bed? Or, I would be in the frame of mind during the day. Okay, so I have my training session coming up. I can do this. But then once I would get on my bike and I knew that we had intervals to do, I would just sit there and think, oh my God, am I going to make this? My legs feel like they're going to freaking fall off. Mm-hmm. Am I going to be able to keep up with my training partner? My heart rate was always elevated, which made it even harder to breathe. In the mornings, my heart rate would be elevated. So, if my resting heart rate was normally in the low 50s, but I'm waking up with it like 62 to 64, that's drastically different for me. And I remember just wanting to cry. And I'm very competitive. My training partner was a great training partner. And inside of me, I was always competing with her. Mm-hmm. And, it's supposed to be competing with yourself as well. But it was always like, oh, am I going to beat her today at whatever our training block was? And I just remember being deflated. And I went to my coach one day and I said, you know what? I just feel like I'm going to break. I want to cry. I don't know if I'm going to make it through my sessions. I'm thinking about going to, when I get to go to bed, when I first wake up. And he's like, you know what? I want you to go home and I want you to measure your resting heart rate the next couple of mornings. And we're going to cut back on your volume. And so when I went back to him a couple of days later to report, he's like, okay, you're done. You're taking a week off. And I'm like, what? He's like, you're taking a week off. You're going to focus on sleeping, getting to bed at a regular time. You're going to focus on your hydration. You're going to focus on your nutrition. Where has it been? And we had my performance metrics too that we'd been recording as well. And so there was a decline in my performance. And I think more than anything, it was also just the mental component as well. And I remember feeling crushed that I was going to have to take some time off because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose ground. Well, we know that, a week off isn't going to set you back. But mentally and emotionally, I was like, oh my God, this is going to set me back. And anyway, it turned out that it was the best thing for me because I took time off and I came back. I was stronger. I had more endurance. I had more energy. And I didn't feel like I was going to get crushed every day.
Okay, podcast over. I mean, I think you covered the whole thing. Like you just gave everybody the whole story on what they should be looking out for. And I guarantee there's people listening going, oh, yeah, like oh,
well, we can definitely cover more as far as
what I mean is like, oh, like I can relate to that. And that's my point again. So there's high achievers out there in life. They're trying to win at life, at fitness, at kids, at
everything.
Marriage, at fuck yeah, like go, it's a competition, right? And so I think that's probably very relatable. I think it's relatable to people, but I think the interesting part is like it took somebody else to tell you had to stop in order to stop. That is the character flaw that comes with being that high achiever, that performer. A lot of times is knowing when and when not to. And oftentimes we always err on the side of no, just go harder. Fuck that.
Mm-hmm.
What you think?
Pussy.
What you think you hear?
Side hard.
Yeah, what you think you hear in your head is that little bitch.
Yep.
And you're trying to ignore or turn the volume up louder than the signals that your body is sending you to tell you, dude, you need to slow down a little bit here, or you need to recalibrate. Maybe the.
And sometimes you get benefit, and sometimes you don't. Because it depends on where you're at on that scale, right?
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting part. I want to hear your story, but that's an interesting thing. Like, are you overtrained? Or are there other things going on, which we'll get into? But yeah, man, I mean, where did it come up for you?
So for me, I trained for years. I never really had any symptoms of overtraining. Yeah, my muscles were sore. I got into a point where I started to get into like fucking around with the ketogenic diet. Mm-hmm. And I think this is where it just went wrong for me. I was training hard consistently. Like we're talking about, I would subscribe to the more overtraining model than I would undertraining, because why would I want understimulation to not grow? At the same time, it takes you going to an overboard and knowing where that, baseline is for you to be able to take it further or know when. Everyone talks about two in the tank.
Right.
Well, if
leave some in reserve, yeah.
If you've never been to failure, The fuck is 2 in the tank? You could have had 7 left. You never like, oh, I just felt like I couldn't do anymore. You felt like you couldn't. Did you know?
Right.
Have you gone to failure? Have you gone to muscular fatigue? Literally, you could not create another contraction, right, with good form. So looking at things like that, when I went to the doctor at this time, I was in the best shape of my life. He looked at me aesthetically and was like, dude, get the fuck out of my office. You want steroids? I'm like, no. Like, I just did blood work. Like, I'm extremely low. I want you to look at me. Did all of his blood work, his P-test. He comes back and I'm below reference range at this time.
On what?
Testosterone, estrogen, vitamin D.
Okay.
I want to say calcium and selenium as well.
Okay.
But just all of those hitting a hard marker and just showing that I didn't have good recovery, right? I was draining my hormones, all of this stuff, even though I looked aesthetically pleasing, right? Mm-hmm. So coming from that, and obviously I got on TRT and went down that route. I feel great now, but actually understanding where that push is and where the difference is between like you're being a bitch and being like your brain's like, hey, you need to chill out. Because there's 2 different mindsets there.
There are.
Right? And you have to break past the one that the mind is telling you to stop pushing and get to the one where it's like, you're pushing now. And now it's like, okay, dude, you need to stop or seriously something's going to happen. And it takes a while to play with that rep range or how far you're pushing yourself into that no man's zone, as I would call it.
Yep. Yeah. I think the takeaways there are, you're reaching like a rock bottom point. I mean, your body is literally shutting down on both of you in both of those stories. I have a similar story I've shared on the show before where, I was training several hours a day. I was definitely not eating up to the calories that I needed to on a regular basis. And there was a lot of things going on in my life personally, financially, from a business perspective that were really weighing down on me. And I wasn't giving credit to all of the things that were basically, let's just say, loading up in what we'll call allostatic stress, right? Like this
cumulative
effect of stress. So, and the answer for me was the therapy, the quote unquote therapy. And I've said it on the show before too. I don't like the term that exercise is being used as therapy. I don't, because I think what you're talking about is that's more of a distraction. Therapy is something different. For a lot of people, they say like, oh, it's my church, it's my therapy or whatever else. I get it. All right. I don't want to play the word game semantics here, but for me, it was a coping mechanism. And I was watching my performance dip and I wasn't, I guess, being aware or making myself aware of why that performance was dipping. So the answer for me was go harder, work out more. Instead of, swimming 3 times a week, it was, I need to be in the pool, 4 to 5 days a week. And, instead of just making sure I was getting my long, slow distance rides in on Sundays or Saturdays, which was like my longer days, I went out and ran intervals on that too. Well, I'm going to still do my 50, 60 miles today.
And then you'd brick it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, then I go do some intervals in the hills. I'll be like, okay, so I'll turn off my regular flat route up onto this mountain hill and I'll do 4 or 5 sprints up the hill, recovery, come back. And, I'm only adding another couple of miles to the ride. Yeah. But, the intensity was there and it was like, okay, so I was coming back and I'd brick it. Yeah. Then it'd be like, well, remember that extra days I wanted to get in the pool? Well, now I could get in the pool. So I wasn't honoring what my body was really telling me, which was it needed to slow down a little bit. And as a result, I used exercise as therapy. I was really just punishing myself out there and making myself worse. And it didn't show up like you just described, like the hormonal downregulation. I had a lot of issues. I've talked about them before. I don't want to bore anybody with those. I had a lot of issues. It didn't show up like that at first, though. It showed up overtraining for me. And let's just say being under recovered at the same time, they showed up for me in different ways. And CeCe, you hit those things right away. One of the things that came up for me, and this is going through kind of signs of whether or not you could be overtraining or not, was the restlessness at night and not being able to fall asleep. Usually when I go, even in my worst, right, like my head would hit the pillow. If my head I'm out. Like, CeCe could attest to this. Like, yeah, exactly. Like, we'll be having a conversation and like 30 seconds later, like I'm snoring. Like when I hit my head hits the pillow, I'm out. If I'm at this time and I wasn't paying attention to it when I was getting into bed, like I just didn't, first off, I didn't feel compelled to go to bed. like I was just kind of antsy. I'll just call it anxious at night. And then when I would lay down in bed, like I would just kind of toss and turn a little bit. And then if I did fall asleep, I didn't stay asleep. I'd sleep probably for like an hour, and then I'd wake up and I'd be restless again for hours. And then maybe in and out of that for the entirety of the night. And that's kind of how it first showed up for me, was this, not being able to sleep well. And with all the things that I know and all the places I've been and all the things that I've done, it never occurred to me why that might be happening. And I was not checking workout logs at that point. I was just like, you got to fucking go, man. There was too many things happening in my life. I was juggling too many things. You just got to go. And had I been, I would have recognized what I recognized later, which was what you mentioned, was my heart rate was elevated well beyond where it should be at that hour, as well as the morning hours. So I think that's one of those things we should talk about, sort of what's happening there, and why that restless sleep might be happening. Because it's not just, oh, you're overtrained, you just don't sleep well. No, that's a physiological response to a downstream. That's a downstream impact of things that are happening physiologically. Without boring people,
Just as far as like your central nervous system.
Elevated cortisol.
Yeah. So yes,
cortisol's bumping.
Yeah.
Epinephrine are bumping.
Yep.
Yeah, so both of those hormones, which are feel-good hormones. I mean, people think of cortisol as being the bad one. We've talked about it.
But they're fine. It does good things, right? It's just elevated all the time, right? Elevated blood sugar does good things too. All the time, it's bad.
Right. So at the end of the day, like my cortisol levels were spiking, and they were staying up where they should be dipping off, right? There should be a release of melatonin. My cortisol should be coming down. The sleep cycle we're preparing for the sleep cycle, and I wasn't doing it. My body didn't know which way was up.
That was a big one for me too. I couldn't sleep. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. on the dot every day.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's when my cortisol was spiking to wake up.
You know what that created for me too? Knowing that, and just frustration, which turned into anxiety. So like when my eyes would open laying there at night, like now I'm like, God damn, it's like, oh my God, what time's, I got to be up in 3 hours to be to work, or whatever. Like now I'm not going to sleep. Now it's in your head, right?
And then don't you wonder how much of it becomes habit?
Oh yeah.
Right?
Once
in a cycle.
Yeah, once you get in that cycle and you're out of that cycle, getting back into a regular cycle can take a long time. It's interesting. Your coach was like, hey, you need to do this for a week. What were the outcomes of just doing it for a week? Like just working on it for taking a week off?
Oh, my mental state improved. I didn't feel like I was going to break during a training session. I didn't feel like I was going to all of a sudden start crying. My legs didn't feel as heavy. I was able to keep up with my training partner. My heart rate had lowered during workouts. My resting heart rate in the morning was lower. Because that time off, I was focusing on sleep and stress management and getting more food in and hydrating. Yeah, because it was during the summertime as well. So, it made a huge difference. But and I was very fortunate because it was only like maybe a week, whereas some people, it could be weeks on weeks for them to get out of an overtrained state.
So we're talking about two different types of like feedback that our body's giving us so that we could get from our body. One would be subjective and one would be objective feedback, right? And the subjective stuff being, what's your heart rate, right? What is your resting heart? Sorry, objective.
Objective.
Yeah, your objective stuff. What is your heart rate? What is your blood pressure? Those types of things, right? What is your respiratory rate? Those are very measurable things versus the subjective data, which would be like, how am I feeling? How am I sleeping?
I hate that.
Again, the objective stuff around sleep, people are wearing devices now and things like that. So I do think there's some value in that. It can, as long as you've been consistent with it and you can see the change over time or at these different stages or phases of your training program or, whatever happens to be. But yeah, there's these different things. And if you're not tracking them, it's tough to keep on track. And it's, again, if you're not watching them, you're not thinking to watch them. So you may not be putting all the pieces together. I just didn't sleep very well. Well, that one night turns into 2 nights. 3 nights turns into 4 nights. 4 nights turns into a dozen nights. And now you're a fucking disaster. And, I guess what I'm trying to say here is like, there's other things that come along. So now the downstream effect of that is, Well, if you're not sleeping, then you're going to be fucking tired, right? And then what does that do? So again, I've said it before, like just talk to somebody who hasn't slept very well for 3 nights in a row and you tell me what kind of human they are. You know, like I can tell you what kind of human I am. I mean, I work to not be an asshole all the time, but when I don't get 3-4 nights of sleep in a row, I'm instant asshole. It doesn't take any more than that for me to be very edgy, very short, very distracted. You know, like again, those are hormonal responses that are happening, and I'm aware of it. Like I'm even aware of it. Like I haven't slept, and yeah, I'm fucking cranky, so don't piss me off. You know, that kind of thing. So, but how does that impact the training thing for people? You know, my overcompensation to that was to go exercise more. And that was, creates all kinds of, you know, additional things. It's piling on.
Yep. I mean, we've said it more than once, more than twice, but less is more.
Right. I mean, you're going to learn it one way or another. So for me, like, again, so what are we talking about here? In this case, there's overtraining. And we talk about like the insomnia or the restlessness. We talk about the fatigue. And those are just things that you can kind of feel. That's the subjective stuff versus the objective data, which is, again, what's my heart rate? Again, what's my Whoop telling me? What's my
heart rate variability?
Variability, HRV. What's my blood pressure? Those kind of things. So if you're tracking those things, you can kind of keep an eye. You can keep an eye on them. But if you're just jumping into this, going, I think I'm fucking overtrained right now, I'm going to start tracking. You don't have a baseline. It's tough to do that. That's why we always encourage people, like, get a baseline, recheck in, recalibrate. Where am I? Because there could be little things in there, little signs that will tell you, like, oh, you better pay attention to this over here. And it's almost always a fundamental, you know, where you can go back and you can check in. Those fundamentals are the same as they always are for us. It's eat squared plus E. Eat proper calories, make sure you're eating real food, then make sure you're getting adequate calories and micronutrients as well as macronutrients within that food. As we get into the tier, the type of diet, and then as we get into this person that's pushing, really should be talking about supplements. So targeted supplementation on the T side should be almost like T squared. And then we get into the S squared, which is sleep and stress management. Those other things aren't happening, then you're fucked. And then the last part of this, the plus E, is the exercise piece. So those are always the fundamentals, right? You can always come back to that compass, you know, to check in. But if you don't have a baseline for what those things are, it's tougher to do. I don't know. What else comes up, like in terms of signs or symptoms that, you know, you nailed a bunch of them there, CeCe, that you know, got the better of you that you found out later. But is there anything else?
Lack of hunger.
Yeah.
Decreased appetite.
Yeah.
For sure. For me, part of it has to do with, like, when you're pushing that hard, it's tough to get the food in. Like it's a chore.
It is.
It can become a chore. And just like the workouts could become a chore, and you start feeling like that, then, you know, it's very easy to skip a meal, or I'm just not going to finish that, or fuck, I got to eat that.
Gastrointestinal distress.
Got to eat that tuna fish again. I got to eat that chicken breast again.
Based on like your individuality, you should be able to finish your exercises completely and feel good afterwards. Like if you're leaving your exercise feeling worn down, you're doing too much, or you're not recovering from your other workouts. Yep. Right. And when we talk about recovery, it's not just what you're eating and sleeping and everything, right? You have shitty cardiovascular health, you're going to have shitty recovery.
Right.
Just hand in hand.
So you're going to start to see the performance dip. If you're not tracking the performance, then you might not see a dip. You may just feel like, oh man, I'm weaker today. All right. Well, is it just one day?
Or is it multiple days?
Is it multiple days?
Right.
Exactly.
And what did you examine? Like, what is it? Like, well, I'm weaker today. I'm not feeling as good. I skipped an entire meal yesterday. I'm 500 calories under where I would typically be. And that equates to about 35 to 40 grams of protein for me, and about, you know, maybe 25 to 30 or 40 grams of carbohydrate for me. And, you know, that meal should have had about 10 to 20 grams of fat in it. And now that's not in there. So you don't have that fuel. So what's the answer? All right, so what do I do the next time I go to the gym? I don't want to feel that again. So what do I reach for? The fucking pre-workout. Yeah, the fucking pre-workout of the caffeine, right? So that's the answer. Like, I need to get amped up, and I'm not feeling that same pump I was feeling when I was working out. Well, are you examining your nutrition? Like, are you examining your hydration? Because if your answer is to go to the pre-workout, you know, with the stim in order to get the muscle pump, right, you know, and get your motor running at the same time. This people, again, people maybe listen to, yeah, I hear you, man, but do you? Do you? Because we talk to people all the time. This is a wild story. So story time. I was working with some law enforcement officers, and I was talking to this one guy. It was one law enforcement officer specific to SWAT selection at his department. So he's a leader on the team. And so, X amount of people are allowed to try out, right? They get selected for selection, right? Are approved for selection, and they come to selection. And that first few days to a week is a bitch, right? It's kind of like a hell week, right? As they go through there from a physical and a mental and emotional perspective, you're getting the beat down. You know it's coming. Like anybody out there that's thinking about selection process of any kind in the military or law enforcement, the beat down is coming. It's part of the process.
It's the initial process.
It is. It's coming. So the preparation for this is important. We've talked about that on the last podcast we did. But and how to do that more properly and how to reach out to the right people to help you. But this guy goes, he's just like, it's just a different game these days, man. Like first off, people don't lift weights like they used to, so they're not as strong as they used to be. They may be more cardiovascularly fit, but they don't have the motor, the engine to power themselves for the longer term. They can get through a workout, but they can't get through 10 workouts at a time over 10 days. They're not eating correctly. He said before the workout or before the day, these recruits or candidates, because they're already officers, these are seasoned people. They don't just let anybody come try out. Like you got to go through an interview process. You've been an officer on the street, somewhere. You've probably made tons and dozens of arrests, right?
Your quals are great.
Multiple incidents, whatever. You passed a basic PT to get there, right? And they're passing out pre-workout the morning of the the first day. Remember when Troy said that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was like, "Are you fucking serious?" Like that's just how fucked up the thought process is
and
going
some of them
into
hadn't
it.
eaten,
and they hadn't eaten.
Yeah.
That was another part of it.
Yep.
They hadn't eaten. And so people go, "Oh, that's so stupid. I would never do that." But you'll go into a workout after maybe having one meal for the day, right? And you've had 8 cups of coffee, right? You didn't sleep the night before, and you're going to go into your workout today with some pre-workout in you, and you're going to try to hit that PR on the platform, or that WOD, or you're going to compete with your training partner who's been tracking everything and doing everything right, and you're going to wonder why your performance sucks, and you're going to be pissed off and go, "Oh, that's my inner bitch. I'm not going to be a bitch today." No, that's your inner stupid ass, for not looking at the other stuff. That's a little bit of a stretch. But my point of that is these guys are passing out pre-workout before the SWAT qual or before basically the SWAT selection on the first day, shaking my head, just going, what in the world? So again, now, obviously that probably doesn't work out well for those people. And that's a very specialized, population. But the point of this is this is not an uncommon thought process for people as they're looking for what do I do to make up? What do I need? You're
talking about top selectors that are still doing the bullshit.
Yeah,
that we're talking about. That's just what we're trying to explain to regular people. Like, dude, you might think you're doing everything. We got guys that are top of the line tier that are coming down. They're still fucking up.
Well, I think the takeaway is, and without getting on too many rants and telling too many stories from my perspective, is people are always looking to put something on the plate when what a lot of times what they need to be doing is taking something off of the plate. We need to be taking things away. And you mentioned it, the coach is like, you're not doing any exercise programming for an entire week. Which brings in another piece in terms of signs and symptoms of whether or not you may or may not be overtrained. And that is this maybe emotional instability or, sensitivity to exercise or not exercising. Now, being driven to get your exercise done and having something sabotage your workout for the day and being upset with that's not what we're talking about. That's not what we're talking about. And I've had plenty of those days at work and otherwise where I'm just pissed. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about an entirely different level of emotional instability, and that is that uber sensitivity. I already told you kind of what mine was I was angry. And that's the easiest thing for me to feel. And when I'm feeling that a lot, I know I'm fucking tired. I know I'm tired. So I have to sit back, take some deep breaths, do some work, to get through that and then examine why I'm feeling like that. But that emotional instability is a thing. So when coach told you you're not doing any exercise, what happened?
I felt crushed. I was like, what? I didn't like it. I didn't I didn't push back because at the same time, like I was just exhausted, but it played on my my securities as far as like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose a whole week of training. I'm going to get weaker. I'm going to get slower. Yeah. So I became very insecure with my abilities and my ability to come back. I mean, it did a mind fuck. That's for sure.
Oh, that could be a huge mind fuck, especially when you've got this, let's say 12 to 16 week training plan, right?
It was more than that, but yeah.
Well, yeah, you've been training for a year, but let's say wherever you're at in your meso or macro cycle there, you're looking at things going, you know how things line up, right? You know, you've got milestones you need to make. And the ultimate one is, you got to run 26, ride 100 and whatever, 12 or whatever, and swim 2.5. Yeah. And if you miss a week, where does that put you at the end? But never mind the next couple of weeks.
So what's great that you just put it that way? The training that these people do, not to get on a tangent, like that you're doing for the Ironman and all this stuff, they have engines to get this shit done. To be honest, if they needed to grind and get it done, they get it done. If you fuck up the last week of your peak, you might not perform as high, but at the same time, if you're that engine and that fucking athlete, you're going to push past that in the time of the event. And that's what a lot of these strength athletes do. If you look at their strength programs, they're like 60% of my 1 rep max today. You're like, dude, that's not even that's an endurance percentage if I'm looking at programming. Right?
Am I really stimulating the system?
But they are. And then they come into the PR and they PR'd 100 pounds, 50 pounds over what they lifted, right? Because they're not taxing that system that hard. And then they come in and they can activate it, right? So there's a difference between like, do you know what the fuck you're doing? And when I say that in terms of squats, deadlifts, like, do you know the skill? Like if I threw a bar at you and said, get underneath the deadlift, you wouldn't need a cue, you wouldn't need anything. It's fucking perfect. And now you're performing in that exercise and you're able to actually achieve results instead of like learning a skill, right? Whereas the central nervous system will down-regulate us and to be like, we're not going to let you perform this skill at 100%. Because you don't know how to fucking do it, right?
Or you're just not ready to do it. We know this is a safety mechanism, right? We're dialing back. We're not giving you everything that you got. I mean, you're reaching for the afterburners, and we're going, the body's going, we're not going to do that. That is the beauty of the human machine and self-preservation. And it trying to do, and that's, going back to like, we're doing everything we can to override that. And again, not paying attention to the signals or listening to the signals that are they're loud and clear and you're just flat out ignoring them. And one of those, again, going back to the emotional piece is, being okay with understanding how rest can impact you. So this speaks a little bit more to are you overtrained or under-recovered? So, and you can be both. Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
So, just because, your training program might not be the culprit here in terms of again, when we're looking at allostatic, stress and all the things that get piled on top. Yes, exercise has a lot to do with it, but we're not going to credit it with everything. Right. And quite frankly, it's one of the easiest things to control, like really
manage, right?
To manage. It's easily managed, right? You do half the sets. You take some sets out, you take some reps out, you take the intensity down, take some load off the bar or whatever. Just don't do it, period. Those are all very simple and easy things to do practically. But when you start getting in the emotional piece, it can really be the mind fuck, like you said. And so I get where that's hard for people. It's been hard for me too. I understand that. But once you get to that place where you can't perform, you're injured. Again, performance is starting to lack. And if you're tracking it, you can bet that if you keep doing this, things are going to happen. The immune system starts to break down. Your performance is going to start to go away. And you should be able to see that, right? Short of being sick, right? And picking up some flu or some virus or whatever else. The other parts are like, my lifts are going down or the
fatigue,
other fatigue, or damn, I'm sore. For a long time.
Like
beyond
your typical muscle soreness.
Yeah.
Right?
So if you're one of those 24 to 36 hour people, if it's starting to track into 48 or even longer in the sore, that's a really good sign. And people are like, I'm sore. Like it was a great workout. Dumb. That's not how you should be. You should be grading or validating your workouts. But if you're sore a little longer, that your body's having a little bit of a tougher time recovering, that is a signal. Listen listen to that
For
signal.
sure. Because I've said this once before, right? When we're talking about recovery versus adaptation, right? Protein synthesis. Let's just call it 72 hours, right? You're not a trained person. 72 hours, maximum amount of time. That's 3 days. So you're sore for 7 days.
Yeah.
There's something wrong.
There's something wrong.
You didn't recover because you're still sore on the 7th day. Protein synthesis is done on the 3rd day. So you're not growing. So what's going on? So now I just lifted to recover to get back to my baseline.
Yeah.
No, I need to barely get over that, right? So I have the response to where I super compensate over, and then I recover and come back. Right?
Yeah, you're talking about the fitness to fatigue model.
Yes, exactly.
And we actually have a really great video on our Red Dot Fitness YouTube done by Caleb, who stands in front of the whiteboard and makes that really very, very easy to understand. So if you don't understand that we work a little harder than threshold, we make sure we take enough time to then recover back to threshold, where we then present another stimulus. Only enough of a dose in order to provide enough to push us beyond that threshold. And we keep doing that over time, knowing that over time, we're going to start to reach the end of that, where that threshold is and where our recovery is. And that's when we start to change our training program as we've adapted or pushed beyond our ability to recover from said stimulus.
Exactly.
So again, you want to watch that video, go over there. It's the fitness to fatigue model video on the Red Dot Fitness YouTube channel. But yeah, what you're hitting there is understanding how your body responds to these stresses, and why the recovery piece and that time down can be very helpful, and not just be very helpful, be required for maximal performance.
And let's dip into like what you're talking about, like recovery time, right? Because there's a whole finite. So for her, right, Ironman, full Ironman, she's pushing hard.
Oh, you're working out 7 days a week.
Coach is like, I want you to pull back everything and fucking rest. Whereas you're here on the other side of the spectrum, where it's like, yeah, I'm a little sore, but like, do I really need a full day of like just rest?
Right.
Or can I go through like a walk?
Active recovery.
Exactly. Like with a band.
Or go swim instead.
So for everybody, the bench presses, I know everyone bench presses lifting. Oh,
it's
my
on Mondays.
chest is sore. It's on Mondays. My chest is sore. So then on Tuesday, guess what? You might go through like a banded fly or a banded press just to get blood in there, get some blood, waste products out, nutrients in, right? So we're getting the tissue to expand and glide, like all of this stuff that's going to help recovery. Whereas on her end, it was like, don't do anything, relax. We need you to sleep, maybe very light movements, right, for recovery, but two ends of the spectrum. But at the same time, it's not like when someone's talking about rest in general, for you need to figure out, do I just sit on the couch? Fuck no.
Right.
To be honest, for most, fuck no. Right.
You're going to keep moving. You're going to find something that's going to be active, and there's so many things you can do. And we've talked about.
I call these my play days, to be honest.
Yeah. What you're doing is you're honoring the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. Your CNS and how those things interact with one another. And there's many different ways to do that. We talked about it on the show before, just through mobility work, yoga. Work through breathing techniques.
Breathwork, big one.
Breathwork is a huge one. Meditation, those kind of things. Sometimes it does mean just fucking chill, fucking Netflix and chill.
Yep.
And maybe that's what it is, where you aren't doing anything. Depending on what you were talking about is like your muscular system being very fatigued, your neuromuscular system being very fatigued versus the CNS being fatigued. All right, we worked out at a level where I'm uber sore from an intensity perspective. My neuromuscular system and recovery system is being taxed there, but my CNS system hasn't been taxed beyond the ability to continue to go. And this is the balance, right? That we're trying to strike. I think is in what we're trying to get into. I think there's a flip side to this too. And if you are that person that's like, no, fuck that little bitch, I'm gonna go,
yep.
And then you start in your head going back to what I think you alluded to this at the beginning, CeCe, which is, I just don't really want to work out today. That's a sign, right? If you're lacking motivation to get that workout done, that's a sign of if you've been on that path and you've been driven and you've been doing it and super consistent and seeing those results that you wanted to see, and then you start waking up going, I'm not feeling it today. That's a symptom of potential symptom, or it's a symptom that could tell you that you're overtraining. Again, that's a loud and clear signal. Don't ignore that. Why am I feeling that? Like, what is that? Is it because I just didn't get enough rest last night? All right. Well, then then maybe that's a smart play. Maybe that's like, I did not sleep well. I do not feel recovered. I had too many drinks last night. I don't really want to work out today because I know I'm going to feel like shit. That's totally different than I've been going down this path. I've been training hard and I have zero drive to do this now or very little drive to do it.
So I guess what you're talking about there is like, we're talking about overtraining versus overreaching.
Yeah.
So for me, like on the last week of let's say a program or the phase that I'm in, let's say strength training, right? I'm obviously in the strength training phase, I'm trying to build my maximum, my 1 rep max, right? So on the last week, I might really push it to failure and overreach. So for 3 days, I'm sore, 2 days, I'm sore over normal, instead of this continual
Cumulative.
cumulative, not recovering accumulatively. And then over time, all of a sudden you hit the wall and there's all these other things you have to deal with. Whereas overreaching, it's like, I was really sore from this 1 workout or 2 workouts where it can be reversible within a couple of days.
Yes.
Whereas overtraining might take a little more time and a little more effort, a little more leniency on yourself and your mental fortitude, to be honest, to fix that and down-regulate it, right? And get your your nutrition back on track and all of that.
Yeah, so it just becomes a little bit of a different focus. Not that the priorities change, but the order of priorities might change a little bit in terms of what should I be focused on. Is it the sleep? Is the sleep the biggest issue for me right now? And it is for a lot of people. Oh, yeah. Is it the nutrition thing? I would count that as a close number 2, right? And then as we get into it, then mindset, I think gets in there. For even before we get to, like I just need days off, right? We need to clean those things up. If I had those things cleaned up, then I wouldn't feel like I need or literally need days off. Yep. So let's talk about like the return to play. So if I'm starting to feel this, like you, CeCe, I mean, your example was you took a whole down week. Whole week of I'm not exercising, right? Which can be, again, hugely challenging from a mental and emotional perspective, psychological, emotional perspective, to focus on these other things. When you returned, how did you walk back into this?
So
or did you run back into it for lack of a better term?
Yeah, no, it was gradual. So the volume of the training in the block that we were in, or the phase that we were in, I wasn't going back with my training partner. I was having to do stuff on my own.
Because she moved on.
Because she was still, doing just fine. So it was managing my heart rate, my respiratory rate. I think the volume was probably decreased by, at least 50% of where she was. And I think, wasn't going back into bricks or double days. It was, focus on one event today, like swimming, and then the next day, maybe running, and then the next day, cycling. So, you have non-weight bearing on with the swimming, and then you have some weight bearing on the second day. And then on the third day, you're on your bike. So you're on weight bearing again. And then, just managing the reaction to that as far as how am I feeling,
and objectively.
Sleeping, heart rate, all of that. And state of mind. So rating on a scale of 1 to 5, how challenging did I feel that workout was? How do I feel like I recovered? And then based on those metrics, making
adjustments. Making adjustments
accordingly. It probably took me, I'm going to say 2 to 3 weeks to get back to where she was.
Yeah, that's interesting. So again, it's 2 to 3 weeks, depending on where you are in your training plan. It seems like an eternity, but the reality of it is it's not that long, in
the grand scheme, right?
Right. And the benefit that you get by handling it that way far outweighs any.
It's not going to take away.
Correct.
That's the thing.
You're already on the path
but you might think it is, right? In the mental, so you're like, oh, dude, I take away. But all of a sudden you come back to your sport and you're like, dude, I'm back to where she was. And we were just training
feeling
partners,
good,
right?
strong, right?
I'm on her ass.
Yeah,
right?
and thank God, right? And so, and then there's that reverse, that the psychology and the emotions can flip on and go, oh, thank God. I didn't completely fall apart here. Had you gone down that path,
definitely
probably would have blown up, right? So that's the other thing. So it's interesting we're talking about this with the psychological, the emotional component, obviously the physiological components of all of this. We've talked about overtraining, just with there's too much in our plan for us to handle right now. Then there's the under recovery, right? And that could be due to all the things that we're not balancing that exercise or our outputs against, right? Yeah. Those inputs are not matching the outputs, sleep, stress management, right? Nutrition, all of those things. you mentioned the term overreaching, or just what we need to do is just maybe pull back a little bit. But the plan is correct. Maybe the intensity just needs to be dialed down a little bit, or the volume needs to be dialed down. It's not that the plan is wrong. Maybe just the execution and the organization of the plan is wrong. And when you start to put all of those things together and you're not paying attention, this goes back to the 2 weeks that it took you to get back. Basically, what I hear you saying there is your recovery debt was 2 weeks in the hole, right? Was 2 weeks in the hole. And so this whole idea of recovery debt, we have a gas tank, right? And the body has emergency reserves. Let's just, for, just kind of a, example, it has reserves that it can dip into. And it's okay to dip into those reserves on a time. Maybe we go through a really, there's a kind of a testing period in our workouts or whatever, and we're really taxing the systems or whatever. But if you're going into those reserves on a regular basis and you're depending on them to get through the basic workouts and the basic recovery, over time, that tank never fills back up. So if you think about your gas tank and you're driving down the road in your car, the faster you go, the harder you push down on that gas pedal, right? The more oxygen and air and fuel you're going to use, right? And it's going to go down. If all things were awesome, you'd have a spare tank of gas in the back of your car with a hose going to, the input on your, on the side of your car there, and you'd be refilling as you're going down the road. But the refill is constant, right? So if you mash on that gas, you're not going to get any more input from that gas tank, that spare gas tank. You're getting the same amount. So if you mash on it for too long, ultimately you run both the gas tank out and the reserves out, right? But if you can manage this to an extent where you're sometimes you mash a little harder, but you make sure that you don't mash too hard for too long, and that it gives that that reserve fuel tank enough time to back things up, knowing that you're never going to be at full. Like the goal is the ultimate goal would be to be at full every single time. But go back to that fitness to fatigue model, you're never actually ever going to be at full. We're always going to be challenged that if you're at full, then you're probably, you're probably not pushing it. You're probably not overtraining, right? You're underfueled, under-recovered, all those other things. And your performance probably isn't increasing because the body needs that stimulus, that stress of being just on the edge of homeostasis or whatever in order to make those gains. So if you think about that analogy when you're going down the road of your fitness journey or your nutrition journey and all those other things, that is really what you're dealing with. You're dealing with this gas tank that's always being, it's always running, right? And it's always coming down. You have the ability to control the flow on that other gas, on that spare gas tank. And it isn't always through one thing. We've talked about the pillars there. All of those contribute to that gas tank. So what's the most important gauge in your car or in your vehicle in that specific circumstance or that instance of that example? It's the fucking fuel gauge, right? Like, and the speedometer, if you're in your RPMs, if you're managing how your car is performing. If you don't have gauges, how are you going to know? You're going to have to go on feel, F-E-E-L. Like you're going to have to go on feelings, right? And if those feelings can get, let's just say, I don't know, like, compromised by, I don't know, you're distracted, by something, or you got your fucking favorite, metal music on, and you all of a sudden the foot gets a little heavier, right? And you're going, or, there's things that are happening in your life where, things that are happening in your life or in your car of life, right? That are pushing you a little harder or distracting you, or the wind's blowing at the front end of that car a little harder. You're having to go, or the hill. That hill's a little longer than you expected, right? Or you get a bump in the road, flat tire, and now you have to make up time. All of those, again, those analogies.
Great life obstacles, by the way. Right. Just all in terms of driving. Great life obstacles.
It's maybe corny, but I think it's relevant, right?
Sure.
And so, again.
Because you have an argument with your boss, what is that dipping into, right?
Right. Have an argument with your girlfriend.
The way the home environment
is,
the kids, everything, it culminates into this recovery.
So at the end of the day, maybe it's not overtraining. Maybe you're just under-recovered. And basically what you've done is you've gone deep into that recovery debt. And so paying attention, staying on track with your stuff, tracking. That's why we say it's so important, super important to do. Get on a program that's planned, right? Am I making gains? Am I not making gains? Get on a nutrition program that can support that and keep you on track. Like, am I hitting my calories? Am I hitting my micronutrients? Track that sleep. It doesn't have to be forever, but get it calibrated, figure it out. Like we've always said, get people on your team that can support you through that and call you out when they see you pushing a little bit too far. It's great to have training partners. Get one that's honest with you, right? That isn't calling you a bitch all the time because you are tired, right? Or you are struggling. Like, maybe more the one that knows when to call you a bitch and knows when to go, hey man, you all right? Like, is everything okay? Like, I noticed you're really struggling today. You're not really all there, or whatever else, because that could be the difference between you knowing and not knowing when we come back to the term wisdom and knowledge being the accumulation of all the things that you know, and wisdom is being knowing when to apply it. So be wise in your choices and understand that overtraining and recovery debt concept.